Hello, and a very warm welcome indeed to this afternoon's iOB business webinar. It's a pleasure to have you on here. Now, just before we get kicked off and whilst we're waiting for everybody to join us, it would be a great idea to run you through exactly how these iOB business webinars work. Okay, so if this is the first time that you're joining us on an iOB business webinar, my name is Ben and I'm the resident business coach here at iOB Business. Okay, now, for those of you that have joined us before, okay, you'll be familiar with the setup, familiar with the structure. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we always do an introduction with myself just now. Once again, my name is Ben, and we run through this for about 5 minutes or so before we dive into today's content. Okay, so we're going to run through the content, the presentation for around about 15 to 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to finish up with a Q&A at the end. Okay, so if you do have any questions for us throughout today's session, you're more than welcome to ask them in the gray Q&A box at the bottom there. Okay, now in between each major topic, there'll be 3. We're going to give you a brief moment to jot down any notes that you might have and indeed ask any questions that you might have for us as well. Okay, so don't worry if you miss a little bit of something, don't worry if you feel the need to catch up, because you are going to get more than enough time to do that throughout today's session. Okay, so welcome to everybody that is joining us today. Once again, my name is Ben. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Today's topic is going to be very focused on decision-making and how that will ultimately affect your path throughout your business, okay? So when we're looking at essentially what you can do and how you can manage your business in a sort of sequential series of decision-making and structured ideas and plans and concepts, you're going to understand much more about how each decision that you make throughout your business will ultimately have a knock-on effect for another sequence, okay, which is always an interesting thing to see. And ultimately, when you make a series of decisions, doors can often open that you didn't know were there. So we're going to cover a little bit about that today as well. Okay, so just whilst we're giving the final minute for everybody to join us now, I'm going to get us set up with the presentation. Okay, so you should be able to see now the presentation on screen. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch off my camera. So you shouldn't be able to see me anymore, but you should still be able to hear my voice and you should be able to see the screen okay. All right, perfect. So if you could just let me know right before we kick off, welcome to everybody joining now, okay? If you could do me a big favor and just let me know that you can hear my voice okay and that you can see the presentation on screen okay today, and we'll get kicked off. All right, perfect. So it looks like we're ready to roll. Okay, so today's topic, once again, business is a sequence of decision-making. Okay, so we're going to cover exactly what that means right after we cover who I am. Okay, so my name is Ben. Once again, it's a pleasure to meet everybody for the first time. If you're joining us on here, brand new, and it's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces again. Okay, so what I specialize in, what I love to do is I work with small businesses every single day to help them achieve stability and growth. It's a pleasure for me to do that daily, and it's a pleasure for me to be on here presenting to you on this webinar today. Okay, so today's session, as always, we're going to cover 3 major points, beginning with education is our best approximation. Okay, I'm going to show you exactly what this means when we dive into topic number 1 today. Topic number 2, we're going to discuss the fact that mistakes will happen. Okay, mistakes happen, it's inevitable, but we must make sure that we learn from them. We're going to cover what that means in topic number 2. And finally, in topic number 3 today, we're going to discuss the fact that doors will open that you couldn't see before. Now, to me personally, this is one of the most interesting parts of business, one of the most interesting developments that we can see as we go forwards, because if we're watching this sequential domino effect of one door opening after the other, it becomes very interesting, and more so very clear as to what our next moves should be. Okay, now we can all come into business with our grand plan, and we should come into business with a grand plan, but we must also be aware that those can change. Okay, so beginning with the fact that education is our best approximation. Okay, now point number 1 here. In business, we must make decisions on a daily basis. Okay, so you could look at this with anything from micro decisions as to what you're going to do first that day, or what you're going to discuss in a daily meeting, or how many people you feel should be in the office that day and how many people should be working at home that day. Okay, now you can compare this with other decisions that would be considered to be major decisions. Okay, so you've got micro and major. There of course is an in between as well, sort of moderate decisions like maybe, you know, when to start on a client project or something like this. But for the most part, you'll find that you have micro decisions and you have major decisions. Okay, now your major decisions could be something like, okay, should we have a meeting with that client about possibly, you know, launching a new campaign for them, or should we hold off, you know, and you might want to do a bit of research and analysis on essentially what might be a great idea or what might be a terrible idea and why. Okay, so often when you're looking at any kind of major decision, this will be ultimately based a lot on historical data, current circumstances, and personally from your gut instinct, from your intuition, what you believe might be best as well. Okay, so in business, we must make decisions on a daily basis. Okay, now some of these decisions are important, others less so. So as we discussed just there, okay, important decisions are essentially classed in this fact as major decisions. Okay, so a major decision could be hiring and firing, it could be letting go of a client, it could be taking a new client on, it could be looking at moving on to a new office, it could be making a large hardware purchase, it could be any number of these things. Okay, so a minor decision is, you know, what are we going to have for food at the staff meeting, or what are we going to wear to work each day. Okay, it's minor decisions, stuff that really shouldn't take up too much of your mental capacity. Now, there is an interesting fact that each day we wake up, now we as human beings, each morning we wake up, we have a very limited amount of mental energy that we wake up with. Okay, so if you imagine it like a battery, now every decision that you have to make takes a little bit away from this battery each time it is made. Okay, so if you spend too much time thinking about things of what should I have for breakfast, what should I wear today, how am I going to get to work, am I going to drive, am I going to take the train, okay, all of these little micro decisions start to eat away at that battery before you've even made it to the office or before you've even sat down at work. Okay, now this is actually why so many of your more famous entrepreneurs like, you know, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, they've openly spoken about before the fact that they don't make too many micro decisions. It's all just done for them because they want to save their mental energy for when they actually need it, when they have to look at hiring or firing, when they have to look at announcing new projects or putting something new in the pipeline. Okay, to them, figuring out what their next move is as a company is much more important than figuring out what they're going to wear that day. Okay, especially Mark Zuckerberg, I'm pretty sure he has the famous jeans and gray t-shirt that he's been wearing every single day. Okay, it's because he keeps his mental energy for things that are more important to him. So some of these decisions are important, others less so. Okay, now we can arm ourselves to make the best possible decision by ensuring that our education is up to scratch. Okay, so one of the main reasons why we might procrastinate or why we might hesitate on making a decision is because we don't really know how to make that decision. Okay, so whilst you might be a bit hard on yourself for not making a decision, whilst you might be a bit hard on yourself for taking a long time to make that decision, ultimately what you must remind yourself of is the fact that, okay, well, look, I might not necessarily be armed here to make this decision. Maybe the reason I'm struggling to make it is because I don't have all the facts or there's stuff that I haven't figured out yet. Okay, so whilst we want to almost engineer a fine process to just make decisions one after the next, after the next, after the next, we do need to make sure that we are well armed to make these decisions. Okay, so part of the process, part of making us better decision makers as a whole is making sure that our education is up to scratch. Okay, now what I mean by this is that you can essentially educate yourself where you need to be educated. And that doesn't always mean picking up a book, okay? That can mean knowing enough about your client. That can mean knowing enough about your workforce, knowing whose strengths and whose weaknesses would play an effect into whatever decision you're going to make, okay? So if you're thinking about launching a new campaign, you look at your team and you say, well, okay, Joey is really strong with analytics, but Sarah's even better with numbers. So I'd actually rather she ran at the top of that project and Joey went and did something else for me instead. Okay, now this is another form of education, understanding the people that you work with, including your clients, and understanding physically what needs to go into any kind of new project is going to help you make decisions. Okay, now that's just a project-based decision. You might have other things to decide, hiring and firing. Okay, do you have the proper education to know whether this person should still be working with the company or whether you should let them go? Okay, are you properly informed? Do you know all the facts? Do you know this person on a personal level or on a business level, okay? Now, you need to make sure that you are up to scratch with all of this. Now, your education, on the other hand, okay, this means, are you up to date with what's going on in the digital world? Do you know the latest algorithms? Do you know what social media platforms are trending right now? Do you know what posts on social media platforms are trending right now? Okay. Your education can also be current and up to date. And of course, the absolute fundamental bare basics. Are you educated in marketing? Are you educated in business? Okay. You combine all of this and you will find that your decision-making becomes a lot easier and a lot smoother. Okay, so we can discuss our decision-making process with mentors, experts, and coaches. Okay, so often one of the reasons why, even if we are well-educated, even if we are well-armed, that we struggle to make decisions is through lack of confidence. Because if you've done something before and it's worked, you'll be confident in making that same decision again. For example, very, very small example here, you want to make pasta for your dinner. Okay, now the decision to make pasta for your dinner the first time was, oh, well, I don't really know if I can make it or not, so I'm just going to try. Okay, now once it worked and you enjoyed your pasta for dinner, the decision the following night to have pasta for dinner again is much easier. Yep, I did that last night and it worked, so I'll do it again tonight. And you have the same result. Okay, now you have confidence here because you have done something twice. It's a repetition now. Okay, now when it works the first time, the second time, the third time, the fourth time, etc., it does develop a confidence within you that you know how to make that decision. You say, okay, well, it's not a matter of can I or can't I, it's a matter of do I want to. Okay, now the reason that sometimes we must discuss decision-making processes with mentors, experts, and coaches is because they know ultimately more than we do. Okay, if we have the correct mentor in the correct field, they'll be able to tell us something about the decision that we're about to make before we make it. Okay, so if you decide to hire someone in your sales team to help you grow your digital agency, you might run this idea by your mentor and they might say, yep, that's a great idea. I did that back in 2005 and it really, really worked well for me, so go ahead. Or they might say, no, that's a terrible idea. You need to hire a marketing person first to help you market your agency. Okay, so the reason that we discuss these processes with mentors, experts, and coaches who know more than us about in that specific niche is so that we can make better decisions going forward. Okay. Now, I'm going to leave that up on screen for you. I'm going to pause for a very brief moment, give you a chance to jot down any notes and ask any questions that you might have, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, perfect. So hopefully you've had a chance now to jot down any notes and indeed ask any questions that you have for me before we move on to topic number 2. Okay, now topic number 2, we're talking about the fact that mistakes will happen. Okay, this is something that's going to help you improve as a business owner, improve as an entrepreneur and a professional, when you begin to understand that mistakes are a fundamental part of business. Okay, they're a fundamental part of life. Now, everybody makes mistakes. Okay, now there's a difference between accidental and deliberate mistakes. Deliberate mistakes are something that should always be avoided. Accidental mistakes can occur at any time, okay? But what we need to make sure of is that we learn from them, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about here. So you must be aware that mistakes are a natural part of business, okay? Now, there are lots of examples I can give when talking about the fact that mistakes are a natural part of business. It can be anything from, you know, sort of misentering information into a spreadsheet, or clicking go on the wrong campaign, uploading the wrong photograph for a social media campaign, sending email to a wrong client. Okay, these are all things that have happened to us in the past. They're things that will probably happen again. Okay, now one side piece of advice I can give you here is that when a mistake occurs, whether it's your fault or not, if it happens within your organization, you are the one who is accountable for it, even if it wasn't directly you who made the mistake. The second piece of advice I can give you on this is when a mistake occurs, don't worry too much and don't panic, because when we do this, we often try and cover it up, or we behave in an embarrassed-like format, and can often make it worse by being defensive or, you know, denying the fact that the mistake happened or anything like that. The absolute best way to do this is when you make a mistake, you be aware that this has absolutely nothing to do with your expertise, your skill levels, or your profession. It doesn't speak to who you are as a person. It doesn't speak to the skill level that you have. A mistake is simply a mistake. Nobody thinks anything. Nobody's making any judgment. The best thing that you can do in that situation is say, oh, geez, my bad. I'm going to sort that out right now and we'll move forward. My apologies to anyone who was affected by this. It won't happen again. Okay. So mistakes, they're a natural part of business. Don't worry about it. If it's nothing went too wrong, then you don't need to worry about anything going too wrong. Okay. Now, of course, slightly bigger mistakes, financial, anything like that, they should be reviewed at a little bit closer in any kind of severe cases, but they should have their own analysis platform, okay, for if something really did happen that was bad, okay? Now, the only real mistake is the one from which we learn nothing, okay? Now, this was Henry Ford that said this, okay, the Ford Motor Company. Now, you'll have seen Fords everywhere, okay? Very, very, very popular car in the UK. One of the biggest car companies ever, okay? Now, looking at this quote, the only real mistake is the one from which we learn nothing, okay? This is so incredibly important because if you make a mistake once, you have the option to learn from it and ensure that it doesn't happen again. And you ensure that it doesn't happen again by instilling different processes, putting in different procedures, or acting differently in a way that would not allow this mistake to occur again. The real problem occurs when we make the same mistake on a repetitive basis, okay? So if we misentered information into a spreadsheet, essentially we put the wrong numbers in, we put the wrong data in or whatever. If we continually do this week on week, then it becomes a bit of a recurrent problem. It begins to say something about who we are. Does it then say that we're not particularly diligent? Does it say that we're not overly bothered about whether it goes right or wrong? Does it say that we're not overly interested in what we're doing? Okay, so one, possibly two mistakes are fine as long as they're accidental. Okay, but one thing that you must always be sure to do after you make a mistake is make sure that you learn from it, because if you don't, it is a wasted exercise and there is potential danger, if you were, to continually make the same mistake again. Okay, so we must be absolutely certain, absolutely concrete that we learn from the mistake. Okay, so here's the little formula for you. Each time a mistake occurs, okay, and something that you should hold close so that you can remember this. Okay, two things that you can do when a mistake occurs. Number one, problem solve the issue. Okay, so as a business coach, I have dealt with mistakes before. Of course, I've made mistakes myself, and I have helped clients with their mistakes too. Okay, so we always do one thing first. We problem solve. Okay, we say, right, what happened? Why did the problem occur? Why did the mistake occur? What was the sequence of events that led to this mistake or problem happening? Okay, we really dig down to the root of what caused this. Okay, so if there was data being misentered into a spreadsheet, we say, right, well, did the person doing this have the proper training? Was the data or their source of data correct? Was the platform working properly? Were they able to work efficiently? Were they educated in that field to be doing that kind of work? Okay, so we really, really analyze why it happened. Okay, now this is so important because it's hard not to make the same mistake again if you don't know why it happened. Okay, if something is going continually wrong and you never investigate the root cause, it's very unlikely that you'll ever prevent the problem from ever happening again. Okay, the second thing that you can do, implement preventative measures to stop it from ever happening again. Okay, so the two major things that we do here. Number one, we problem solve. Number two, we prevent. Okay, so once you have figured out why the issue is occurring, what the problem is and why it's happening, you then make sure that you instill preventative measures to make sure that it never happens again. Okay, so if somebody in your team is making a regular mistake, send them to a training course to make sure that they educate themselves better. If diligence is the problem, make sure that they're paying close attention to detail on the work that they do and they're keeping an eye on what's happening. Okay, if the software is playing up, a piece of software isn't working properly, make sure that you send a ticket off and you complain about that to them. Okay, implement preventative measures where you can, when you can, to stop things like that from happening. Okay, so now I'm going to leave you up with topic number 2. Please jot down any notes and ask any questions that you might have for me before we dive on to the third and final topic of today's session. Okay, perfect. So hopefully you've had a moment now to jot down any notes that you might have and indeed ask any questions that you have for me as well. I've just seen one come in there. Thank you very much. I'll get that at the end. Okay, so the third and final topic on today's session: doors will open that you couldn't see before. Okay, now this is perhaps one of the most important developments through business, is to be aware that things are going to open up all the time. Okay, things that we didn't know would or wouldn't be there. Okay, now this is often talked about when we develop business plans, we develop ideas and concepts of where we want our business to go, especially in the early stages. Okay, now what we often fail to realize, and for no other fault, the fact that we simply don't know and can't predict, is that doors will open that you couldn't see before. Okay, now this is excellent, and what it means is usually it will alter your decision-making process. Okay, so if you intended to earn a certain amount of money, a certain amount of ways, you might then realize that, well, okay, the door for a bigger contract just opened up, so I actually think we should stick with our original niche. We shouldn't look at developing any kind of alternative niche until we have cracked this. Okay, so your plan can change, and that's okay, that's completely fine. Okay, so after each decision is made, a new path will become visible. Okay, now decisions, again, they can be anything from you relieve a member of your team who wasn't performing properly, and instead of replacing somebody in that same role, you then realize, well, actually, it might be better to hire somebody in a different role, one that would have a more beneficial effect to the company. Okay, so after each decision is made, a new path will become visible. Now, the path is only going to become visible if you are looking for it, if you're there with an open mind and open eyes. Okay, if you become regimented or stuck in your ways, you're going to have a much more difficult time seeing something that's ironically right in front of you. Okay, so this is something that we want to be absolutely aware of. Make sure that after each decision is made, a new path becomes visible and that you can see it. Okay, so again, if you relieve a client, you say, actually, I'm afraid we can't work with you anymore. We maybe then analyze that situation and we say, well, why did it not work with them? Okay, now instead of going to find a client exactly like them, we look at maybe a slightly different demographic. Maybe we approach the advertising in a different way. Okay, now sometimes you might choose to launch a new advertising campaign and you land a massive client. Okay, then that new path becomes visible. So it's very exciting, but you must always be willing to change and alter from the original plan only if it's beneficial. Okay, so often you'll find that if you're one of these people that likes to start their business planning at the start of the calendar year, let's say early January, by the time you get to the end of December of that year, you'll find that you've hopped, skipped, and jumped so many different times into so many different decisions that you haven't even realized what you've done, but ultimately you're pleased with where you are most of the time. Okay, now it's always a good idea, just to touch on this before we move on, to write down and understand your goals, your objectives and your ambitions, because you do sometimes need to pull yourself back on track to make sure that you're not veering too far off. But the reason I share this with you is because you shouldn't be too critical of yourself if you have a new idea and you want to change direction. Okay, so let's say that maybe you're going to the gym and you're looking to improve your fitness, and let's say that you're spending 30 minutes a day on the treadmill. Okay, but then you realize that if you actually intended aerobics classes, say 5 times a week, you would improve your fitness faster than if you went on the treadmill 30 minutes a day for 5 days. Okay, now the reason this is important is because you have found an alternative and superior method to achieve the same outcome, but you're going to do it quicker and more effectively. When this happens, that is a precise example of something that would benefit your company, your business, your digital agency. Okay, so second thing, you will be introduced to individuals, okay, directly or indirectly, that you didn't know existed. The people that we know in business is one of the biggest reasons why we grow, develop, and act the way we do as entrepreneurs. Our network is everything. Everybody has different skills, values, and resources available that we can share with each other. Okay, so when you're introduced to a new person, whether this be directly, say at a networking event, or whether indirectly through a referral, a friend, a contact, a business card, okay, you need to be aware that this person might be able to accelerate your company or your business in a different way. Okay, your digital agency could see new heights, it could see different niches, it could see different avenues, it could have direct contracts, you could have delegates helping you with various avenues, okay, various different things that you weren't aware of before, but have now become available to you because you have met somebody new. Okay, often the way we grow and develop as professionals, as entrepreneurs, is meeting somebody in a slightly different pocket or slightly different area as to where we are, so that they can not only educate us, but show us their way of doing things, and sometimes either become a partner or a client. Okay, now this is why there's that common saying of your network is your net worth. Okay, it's so important to understand this, and it's absolutely true. The more valuable contacts you have, the more chance you have of being successful in business. Just statistically speaking, working with other people as opposed to trying to do it all on your own will improve your chances of success. Okay, in business, we must be prepared to adapt and change as is necessary in the digital landscape. The digital marketing world is perhaps one of the most diverse I have ever come across. It's always changing, it's always moving, it's always dynamic. Okay, so there are updates coming in, there's new algorithms, there's new social media updates, there's new ways of doing things like posts and stories and videos and content. You need to be aware of what's happening all the time. Okay, you need to adapt and you need to change. Okay, just because what worked last week, okay, doesn't mean that it's going to come ahead and work this week again as well. If something is not working, but it used to work, don't sit there and question why it isn't working. Go and figure out what is working. The most productive use of your time in these situations is to go and figure out where the winning is happening and go and do some winning yourself. Okay, so in business, we must be prepared to adapt and change as is necessary in the digital landscape. As you and your business grow, so will your opportunities. Okay, so best example I have of this: if you only work an hour or two a day, you don't really make the effort to speak to anybody new, you don't really put yourself out there, you don't share any content online, you don't do any additional training, you don't do any additional education. If your business isn't developing, you really just have to look internally. You say, well, did I learn anything new this week? No. Did I speak to anyone new this week? No. Did I post anything out there into the open universe this week? No. Okay, so you didn't make any new contacts, you didn't learn anything new, and you didn't try and share anything or develop a relationship with others in any other format at all. So in essence, everything that you've done this week has been behind closed doors. You haven't grown educationally, and you haven't grown your network. Okay, so if these things aren't happening, if you're not meeting new people, if you're not making new contacts, if you're not learning new things relevant to your industry, and you're not sharing what you know, you're not empowering other people as well. Okay, because you know what we put out does come back. Okay, so if you're not doing all of these things, you can be surprised when your business isn't growing. Okay, this is these simple fundamentals. Opportunities don't just fall on our lap. Okay, we have to get out and we have to try. So if you've ever seen somebody who looks more successful, that's likely because they've spent more time educating themselves, they've spent more time meeting new people, and they've spent more time putting the feelers out into the universe by way of content, by way of digital content, by way of educational sharing, all these different things that they've been doing to build ultimately contacts and ultimately accumulate wealth in their business. Okay, so as you and your business grow, so will your opportunities. Okay, so I'm going to give you a brief moment now to review topic number 3 and indeed ask any questions that you might have for me whilst I take you on to the recap for today's session. Okay, perfect. So hopefully you're all set now with the questions and the notes, and I have just got another one in there. Thank you very much. So I'll get to those in just a moment. So to recap today's session, education is your best weapon. Point number 1 to take home. Point number 2, you will make mistakes, choose to learn from them. Okay, don't get yourself down, don't beat yourself up, choose to learn from these mistakes. Okay, new doors will open, embrace the change. Being adapt, being versatile, being willing to grow is very, very important in business. Okay, now a massive thank you as always for attending the session today. If you would like to talk to a member of our team, you're more than welcome to head over to iob-business.com/talk-to-us and book a call at a time that suits you. Okay, so you can go ahead, you can do this whenever you like. I'm going to leave this up on screen for you just now whilst I answer the questions that I have from you. Okay, so question number 1 from today: how can I reduce my chances of making the wrong decision? Okay, that's a fantastic question. Now, my answer here, there's no way to guarantee that you will make the right decision, but if you work with people who have been there and done that, okay, if you work with people who can show you the path, it's going to reduce your chances of making a mistake, essentially. So we'll go back to the earlier example. Okay, let's say that you're looking to hire a salesperson and it was one of the best things that ever happened to your mentor. Okay, if you repeat the same, you're making the same decision as they were with the education that you have, and you've done your research and you filled the role properly, it, by all means, should work out if that has been the calculated and correct move. Okay, but if you go and hire somebody who works in finance and try and put them in a sales seat, it's probably going to go wrong. Okay, so we use common sense and common logic. We also look to, learn from people who have been there and done that and who have achieved a level of success in their own right. Fantastic question. Thank you for asking. Okay, second question. What would constitute a decision? Okay, great question. So decisions can be, once again, they can be micro, they can be major, they can be anything in between. Okay, so essentially, a decision can be anything from launching an advertising campaign to deciding how to email a client back that day. Okay, the more sort of menial decisions you can remove from your day-to-day life, like what you're going to wear that day or what you're going to have for your breakfast, the more mental capacity you leave for other things. Okay, like for example, what am I going to do about that team member who's being difficult, or how are we going to respond to a client with this project? Okay, so decisions like that undoubtedly more valuable than deciding what to wear that day. Okay, so a massive thank you for that question. Just going to check that we don't have any more. Okay, perfect. Looks like that's all the questions that we have in for today. So once again, as always, an enormous thank you for taking the time to join us today. It's been a real pleasure presenting to you, and I very much look forward to seeing you again a couple of weeks from now. Take care and speak soon.